The morning Daniel Hartwell stripped me of my Chief Technology Officer title and handed me a janitor's uniform, he smiled with the same arrogance that had defined our 3-year relationship. "Consider this a learning experience, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured toward the cleaning cart waiting outside my corner office. "Maybe starting from the bottom will teach you some humility." What he didn't know was that every line of code powering Hartwell Industries' revolutionary AI platform, every algorithm generating their billion-dollar revenue stream, was registered under my name in the patent office. As I watched him settle into my chair and prop his feet up on my desk, I couldn't help but smile back, knowing that his empire was about to crumble faster than he could say intellectual property theft. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The fluorescent lights in the supply closet cast harsh shadows across the industrial cleaning equipment as I stood there in my new navy blue uniform, the fabric rough against my skin, after years of tailored business suits. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had designed the very systems keeping this 40-story building running was now expected to mop its floors. But Daniel Hartwell had always underestimated women, particularly those who dared to challenge his authority or, in my case, outshine his mediocre contributions to the family business. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and until this morning I held the position of Chief Technology Officer at Hartwell Industries, one of the most influential tech companies on the West Coast. At 34, I had built my reputation on groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence and machine learning, holding dual PhDs in computer science and electrical engineering from Stanford. My dissertation on predictive algorithms had been published in 3 major journals before I was 28, and my subsequent research had attracted attention from tech giants across Silicon Valley. 3 years ago, Richard Hartwell, the company's founder and CEO, had personally recruited me from Tesla, where I'd been leading their autonomous driving AI development. "We need someone with your vision," he'd told me during our initial meeting at his sprawling Palo Alto estate, "someone who can take Hartwell Industries into the future." The offer had been compelling, not just the substantial salary increase, but the promise of unlimited research funding and the chance to build something revolutionary from the ground up. What I hadn't anticipated was Richard's son, Daniel, whose Harvard MBA and inherited sense of entitlement had made him the company's executive vice president, despite having contributed nothing of substance to its technological achievement. From my first day, Daniel had viewed me as a threat to his eventual succession, his resentment growing more pronounced as my innovations began generating unprecedented profits for the company. The quantum intelligence platform I'd developed over the past 2.5 years represented a breakthrough in predictive AI technology. Unlike traditional machine learning models that required massive datasets to function effectively, my system used quantum probability calculations to make accurate predictions with minimal input data. The applications were endless: financial markets, medical diagnosis, supply chain optimization, climate modeling. Early beta tests had shown accuracy rates of 97%, and several Fortune 500 companies had already signed preliminary licensing agreements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Every aspect of the platform, from the core algorithms to the user interface design, had been conceived and developed by me personally. I'd worked 18-hour days for months, coding late into the night in my home office while Daniel attended charity galas and networking events, taking credit for my team's achievements whenever his father asked about our progress. The patent applications I'd filed were meticulous, covering not just the primary system but every innovative component and methodology I'd created along the way. The morning of my demotion had started like any other. I'd arrived at the office early, as was my habit, to review the overnight processing reports from our AI servers. The platform had been performing flawlessly, executing complex calculations that would have taken conventional systems weeks to complete. I'd been putting the finishing touches on my presentation for the board meeting scheduled for the following week, where I planned to propose expanding the platform's capabilities into new market sectors. Daniel had appeared in my doorway at exactly 9:15, flanked by 2 security guards and HR Director Margaret Walsh, whose uncomfortable expression suggested she'd been pressured into this confrontation. "Sarah, we need to talk," he'd announced, settling into the chair across from my desk with theatrical authority. The security guards remained by the door, their presence clearly intended to intimidate. The board has been reviewing your performance, Daniel had continued, consulting a folder that I later realized contained fabricated documentation. There are concerns about your leadership style, your ability to work collaboratively with other departments, and frankly, your attitude toward company hierarchy. His words had been carefully crafted, designed to create a paper trail justifying what was clearly a personal vendetta disguised as corporate restructuring. Margaret had shifted uncomfortably in her chair as Daniel outlined my supposed shortcoming, my unwillingness to accept feedback from senior management, my tendency to isolate myself from team-building activities, and my failure to properly credit collaborative efforts were all cited as evidence of my inadequacy as a technology leader. Each accusation was a distortion of my dedication to actual work over office politics, my focus on results rather than appearances. However, Daniel had said, his smile taking on a particularly nasty quality, we believe in second chances at Hartwell Industries. We're prepared to offer you a position in our facilities management department, where you can learn the value of honest work and humble service. The janitor's uniform had been waiting on a chair beside him, clearly pre-planned for maximum humiliation. The moment had crystallized everything I'd suspected about Daniel's character and his intentions toward me. This wasn't about performance or company needs. It was about putting an uppity woman in her place, about demonstrating his power to destroy careers on a whim. His assumption that I would either quit in humiliation or accept this degradation revealed how little he understood about my personality or my resources. And what will happen to the quantum intelligence platform during this transition period? The question had been calculated, designed to expose the flaw in his plan. Daniel's confident expression had faltered slightly. We'll manage the technical aspects internally, he'd said, waving dismissively. The platform is essentially complete, and we have capable engineers who can handle any maintenance issue. His ignorance of the platform's complexity was breathtaking, but not surprising given his general disinterest in understanding the technology that generated his family's wealth. Of course, I'd agreed, gathering my personal items from my desk. I'm sure your team will have no trouble managing the quantum probability matrices and the adaptive learning protocols. The source code documentation should be quite sufficient. What I didn't mention was that the documentation deliberately omitted critical implementation details, and that the platform's core algorithms were encrypted using methods I'd developed specifically to prevent unauthorized access. As I'd walked toward the elevator carrying my box of belongings and my new uniform, several of my engineering colleagues had watched with obvious confusion and concern. These were brilliant professionals who understood exactly what my departure from the technology leadership meant for the company's future, even if Daniel remained obliviously confident in his decision. The supply closet where I now found myself was located on the 38th floor, ironically just 2 levels below my former office. The industrial cleaning equipment surrounded me like monuments to manual labor, a stark contrast to the sophisticated technology I was accustomed to manipulate. But as I changed into the uniform, I felt no shame or defeat. Instead, I experienced a sense of anticipation, knowing that Daniel had just triggered a series of events that would ultimately destroy everything he thought he was protecting. My smartphone buzzed with the first of what would be many text messages from colleagues expressing outrage and disbelief at my treatment. "This is insane," wrote Kevin Martinez, my lead systems architect. "The platform won't run without your oversight." Another message from Diana Foster, our data scientist, was more direct. Daniel just signed the company's death warrant, but the most significant communication came from an unexpected source, an encrypted message from someone identifying themselves only as patent defender. The message was brief but intriguing. "Ms. Chen, we've been monitoring recent developments at Hartwell Industries with great interest. When you're ready to discuss your options, please contact us through the secure portal linked below. Time may be of the essence." I stared at the message, wondering who had been watching the situation closely enough to reach out within hours of my demotion. The encryption level was sophisticated, suggesting either government involvement or a major law firm with serious technical resources. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone had been anticipating this exact scenario. The morning shift supervisor, a kind older woman named Rosa Martinez, appeared in the doorway of the supply closet with a sympathetic expression. Chen, she said quietly, using my title despite my new circumstances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I want you to know that this is wrong. What they've done to you. Everyone in the building knows who really built the systems that keep this place running. Her support was touching, but also revealing. If the support staff understood my value to the company, Daniel's isolation from reality was even more complete than I'd realized. Thank you, Rosa, I replied, adjusting the unfamiliar uniform. I appreciate your kindness more than you know. She handed me a master keycard and a detailed cleaning schedule. Your first assignment is the executive floor, she said with a meaningful look. All the offices, including the corner suite that used to be yours. Take your time up there. Sometimes these deep cleaning jobs require extra attention to detail. The irony of being assigned to clean my former workspace wasn't lost on me, but Rosa's emphasis on extra attention to detail suggested she understood that I might have reasons beyond simple custodial duties for spending time in that area. The building's support staff had always been more observant than the executives realized, and their loyalty was clearly with the person who had always treated them with respect rather than the entitled heir who saw them as invisible. As I gathered my cleaning supplies and headed toward the service elevator, my mind was already working through the implications of my new position. Daniel had inadvertently given me unprecedented access to the entire building, including areas that my executive status had actually restricted. Janitors went everywhere, saw everything, and were largely invisible to the people making crucial business decisions. The service elevator was a stark contrast to the elegant executive elevator I'd used for 3 years. Utilitarian and windowless, it provided access to every floor, including restricted areas like the server rooms and executive conference facilities. As we rose toward the 39th floor, I considered the strategic advantages Daniel had unknowingly handed me. The executive floor was eerily quiet at this early hour, most of the senior staff not arriving until well after 9 o'clock. My former office looked strange from the hallway perspective, the familiar space now belonging to someone else. Through the glass walls I could see Daniel had already begun rearranging the furniture, replacing my technical references with sports memorabilia and photographs of himself at various social events. I began my assigned cleaning routine with the conference rooms, working methodically while listening carefully for any sounds of arriving executive. The building's acoustics were excellent, and I quickly discovered that voices from the boardroom carried clearly into the adjacent storage area where cleaning supplies were kept. This was information I filed away for future reference. My smartphone buzzed again with another encrypted message from Patent Defender. Initial patent research confirms your position is stronger than you might realize. 17 core patents registered solely in your name, with filing dates predating your employment agreement. Recommend immediate consultation to discuss protection strategies. 17 patents. I'd actually filed 23 applications related to my work at Hartwell Industries, but 17 had already been approved and registered. Each one represented a critical component of the quantum intelligence platform, and more importantly, each one was filed in my name alone, as the inventor. The company's standard employment agreement included intellectual property clauses, but those only applied to inventions created using company resources and during company time. The majority of my breakthrough work had been done at home, using my personal equipment often during weekends and holidays. The legal implications were staggering. If Hartwell Industries was using my patented technology without proper licensing agreements, they were committing intellectual property theft on a massive scale. The licensing fees alone would bankrupt most companies, and the statutory damages for willful infringement could reach into the billions of dollars. As I continued cleaning, working my way toward my former office, I began mentally cataloging every system and process that relied on my patented innovation. The platform wasn't just using one or two of my patents, it was built entirely on my intellectual property, from the quantum probability calculations, to the adaptive learning algorithms, to the user interface protocol. Daniel's confidence in managing the technical aspects internally was about to be tested in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. The door to my former office was unlocked, Daniel having apparently assumed that changing the nameplate was sufficient to establish his ownership. The space felt foreign despite my having worked there for years, the personal touches that had made it mine already removed and replaced with symbols of Daniel's authority. My technical drawings had been taken down from the walls, replaced with his Harvard MBA diploma and several photographs of him shaking hands with local politicians. I began dusting the furniture with particular attention to detail, as Rosa had suggested, while carefully observing how Daniel had reorganized this. The computer terminal was still logged into the company's administrative systems using his credentials, displaying several open applications, including the quantum intelligence platform's monitoring dashboard. The irony that he was using my technology to spy on my technology wasn't lost on me. The dashboard showed everything I needed to know about the platform's current status. Usage had increased dramatically over the past month as new clients came online, generating revenue streams that were approaching the projections I'd included in my quarterly report. The system was performing flawlessly, processing thousands of complex calculations every hour, but I could see subtle signs that indicated potential problems on the horizon. My smartphone buzzed with yet another message, this time from Kevin Martinez. Emergency meeting in conference room B at 10:30, platform showing anomalies in the quantum matrices, need your input AS. The message was followed immediately by another from Diana Foster, something's wrong with the learning protocols, error rates climbing steadily since this morning. I smiled as I continued dusting, understanding exactly what was happening. The quantum intelligence platform wasn't just sophisticated technology, it was adaptive technology that required constant interaction with its creator to maintain optimal performance. The system had been designed with built-in dependencies that I'd never documented, safeguards that prevented unauthorized modification or replication. Without my direct oversight, the platform would gradually degrade, not catastrophically enough to trigger immediate alarm, but steadily enough to undermine confidence in its reliability. The quantum probability calculations would become less accurate. The adaptive learning protocols would begin producing inconsistent results, and eventually the entire system would require complete recalibration, a process that only I fully understood. Daniel's voice echoed from the hallway, as he arrived for his first full day as the office's new occupant. Margaret, I want a complete assessment of our technical capabilities by end of business today, he was saying to the HR director, who was struggling to keep pace with his rapid stride. We need to demonstrate that the company can function effectively without disruptive personalities hindering our progress. Of course, Mr. Hartwell, Margaret replied, though her tone suggested deep skepticism about the wisdom of Daniel's recent decision. However, I should mention that several department heads have expressed concerns about the transition. The engineering team in particular seems quite unsettled. They'll adjust, Daniel said dismissively as they entered the office where I was cleaning. He barely glanced in my direction, treating me with the casual indifference typically reserved for furniture or fixtures. Change is always difficult, but it's necessary for growth. My father built this company by making tough decisions, and I intend to follow his example. Margaret noticed me and offered an apologetic smile before following Daniel toward his desk. About the board meeting next week, she continued, several members have specifically requested updates on the quantum intelligence platform. Should I schedule technical presentation? I'll handle the technical discussions, Daniel replied confidently, settling into what had been my chair. The platform is essentially automated at this point. We're moving beyond the development phase into pure revenue generation. His certainty was breathtaking given his complete ignorance of the system's actual complexity. I continued my cleaning routine, moving efficiently around the office while remaining effectively invisible to both Daniel and Margaret. Their conversation provided fascinating insights into Daniel's plans and his fundamental misunderstanding of the technology he now claimed to control. Have we heard anything from Dr. Chen since yesterday? Margaret asked carefully. Some of the technical staff have been asking about transition procedures for her projects. Dr. Chen is learning valuable lessons about teamwork and company loyalty, Daniel replied with obvious satisfaction. Her replacement will be much more collaborative and significantly less demanding of company resources. The replacement he was referring to was apparently Kevin Martinez. My former subordinate who was brilliant but lacked the comprehensive understanding necessary to maintain the platform independently. Kevin is certainly qualified, Margaret agreed diplomatically, but he's been expressing concerns about managing the more advanced systems without additional training or documentation. Daniel waved dismissively. Kevin is being modest. The technical aspects are well documented, and we have consulting agreements with several external firms if specialized knowledge becomes necessary. This was another fundamental misunderstanding. The consulting firms he was referencing specialized in conventional AI systems, not the quantum-enhanced technologies I'd pioneered. As their conversation continued, I realized that Daniel's confidence was built on a house of cards. He genuinely believed that my role had been primarily administrative, that the technical innovations attributed to me were actually collaborative efforts that could be easily replicated by other engineers. His Harvard MBA had apparently taught him that people were interchangeable resources, not that some individuals possessed unique knowledge that couldn't be simply transferred to successors. My smartphone vibrated with an urgent message from Kevin. Platform crash imminent. Primary quantum matrices failing. Need access to your research files immediately. The message was followed by another from Diana. Error cascade spreading through all subsystems. Clients starting to report accuracy issues. The timeline was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. I'd expected the platform to maintain stable operation for at least a week before degradation became noticeable, but Daniel's aggressive restructuring had apparently triggered safeguards I'd built into the system to prevent unauthorized modification. His attempts to streamline the technology had instead accelerated its collapse. I finished cleaning the office and gathered my supplies, preparing to move to the next assignment on Rose's schedule. As I headed toward the door, Daniel's voice stopped me. "You," he said, pointing in my direction without looking up from his computer, "make sure you pay special attention to the windows. I want this office to reflect the same level of excellence we expect from all our operations." "Hartwell," I replied with the deferential tone expected from someone in my new position, "I'll make sure everything meets your standard." What I didn't mention was that my standards were considerably higher than his, and that he was about to discover exactly what excellence meant when applied to intellectual property protection. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of cleaning assignments and increasingly frantic messages from my former colleagues. The quantum intelligence platform was experiencing a cascade failure that would soon become impossible to hide from clients and board members. Kevin and Diana were working desperately to maintain system stability, but without access to my research files and implementation notes, they were essentially trying to repair a quantum computer with a screwdriver. By noon, the situation had escalated to the point where emergency meetings were being called throughout the building. I could hear heated discussions through the office doors as I continued my custodial rounds, executives demanding answers that no one could provide. The platform that had been generating millions of dollars in revenue just days earlier was now producing results so inconsistent that several major clients had suspended their contracts pending investigation. The encrypted message I'd been expecting arrived just after lunch. "Ms. Chen, circumstances suggest that immediate action may be required to protect your intellectual property rights. Are you available for a confidential consultation this afternoon? The situation appears to be developing more rapidly than initially projected." I looked around at the building that had been my professional home for 3 years, at the technology infrastructure I'd designed and built, at the corporate empire that Daniel thought he controlled. By evening, everything would change. By tomorrow, Daniel Hartwell would understand exactly what it meant to underestimate Dr. Sarah Chen. The afternoon would bring revelations that would shake Hartwell Industries to its foundations, but for now I had windows to clean and floors to mop. After all, Daniel had specifically requested excellence in all operations, and I always delivered exactly what was requested, usually in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations. As I prepared my cleaning supplies for the next assignment, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of the situation. Daniel had demoted me to teach me humility, but he was about to learn the most humbling lesson of his privileged life. The woman he'd dismissed as a disruptive personality was about to become the most disruptive force his company had ever encountered, and unlike his previous challenges, this one couldn't be solved with family connections or inherited authority. The real story was just beginning. The law offices of Sterling, Morrison and Associates occupied 3 entire floors of the Meridian Tower,
their glass conference rooms offering panoramic views of downtown San Francisco's financial district. I sat across from Rebecca Sterling, the firm's founding partner, still wearing my janitor's uniform beneath a hastily borrowed blazer that Diana Foster had retrieved from her car. The contrast between my appearance and the opulent surroundings would have been comical under different circumstances, but the gravity of our discussion left no room for humor. Chen, the preliminary analysis of your patent portfolio is remarkable, Rebecca said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. 23 approved patents, all filed in your name as sole inventor, covering virtually every aspect of quantum-enhanced artificial intelligence. The potential licensing value exceeds $2 billion. Her voice carried the precise authority of someone who had spent decades dismantling corporate empires built on stolen intellectual property. Rebecca Sterling was legendary in Silicon Valley legal circles, known for her ruthless efficiency in patent litigation, and her particular expertise in technology theft cases. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones, and her steel-gray eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the documentation I'd provided. At 62, she had earned her reputation by destroying companies that believed size and resources could overcome legal righteousness. The employment agreement you signed with Hartwell Industries is surprisingly favorable to your position, continued James Morrison, the firm's intellectual property specialist. A younger man with the intense focus typical of patent attorneys, he had spent the past 4 hours analyzing every clause of my contract with microscopic attention. The intellectual property provisions only apply to inventions created during working hours using company equipment. Your research logs clearly demonstrate that the breakthrough work was conducted at your home laboratory using personal resources.
The home laboratory he referenced was my converted garage in Menlo Park, equipped with quantum computing arrays I'd purchased with my own funds over the past 5 years. Every significant innovation that powered the quantum intelligence platform had been conceived and developed in that space, often during weekends and holidays when I worked alone on theoretical problems that fascinated me beyond professional obligations. More importantly, Rebecca added, consulting her tablet with practiced efficiency, the patent filing dates predate your employment by 6 months in most cases. This establishes clear ownership independent of any corporate claims. She looked up from the screen, her expression conveying both admiration and anticipation. Hartwell Industries has been using your technology without authorization for over 2 years. The statutory damages alone could bankrupt them. The third member of their team, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, served as their technical consultant and expert witness in complex patent cases. Her PhD in quantum physics from Caltech made her uniquely qualified to understand the revolutionary nature of my innovations. Sarah, what you've created here isn't just an improvement on existing AI technology, she said, studying the technical specifications I'd provided. This is a fundamental breakthrough that redefines how machine learning systems process information. The quantum probability matrices alone represent a paradigm shift in computational theory. As they continued their analysis, my smartphone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from Hartwell Industries. Kevin Martinez had sent 17 texts over the past hour, each one describing new failures cascading through the quantum intelligence platform. Complete system collapse imminent, his latest message read. All quantum matrices destabilized. Clients demanding immediate explanation. Daniel, blaming sabotage. Diana Foster's messages painted an even grimmer picture of the chaos erupting throughout the company. Emergency board meeting called for 4 o'clock, she reported. Richard Hartwell flying back from Tokyo. Daniels locked himself in his office, refusing to see anyone. Stock price down 12% since market open. The timeline was accelerating exactly as I'd anticipated. The platform's degradation had reached the point where even non-technical executives could recognize that something catastrophic was occurring. Without my oversight and the continuous calibration protocols I'd built into the system, the quantum-enhanced algorithms were producing increasingly erratic results that destroyed client confidence and triggered automated safety shutdowns. Chen, Rebecca said, drawing my attention back to the legal strategy session. We need to discuss the scope of relief you're seeking. Patent infringement damages could reach into the billions, but there are also options for injunctive relief that would immediately halt their use of your technology. The prospect of shutting down the quantum intelligence platform entirely was tempting from a vindictive standpoint, but I had broader considerations to weigh. My primary concern is protecting the technology from misuse, I replied carefully. Daniel Hartwell has demonstrated complete disregard for proper development protocols and ethical implementation standards. If he maintains control of the platform, he could cause irreparable damage to the field of quantum AI research. James Morrison nodded approvingly. That gives us additional leverage in any settlement negotiations. We're not just seeking monetary damages but also ensuring responsible stewardship of revolutionary technology. He made several notes on his legal pad before continuing. However, we should prepare for aggressive opposition. The Hartwell family has substantial resources and political connections that they'll certainly deploy against us. They also have excellent legal representation, Rebecca added with a slight smile that suggested anticipation rather than concern. Harrison, Blake and Associates handles most of their corporate litigation. I've faced them numerous times over the years, and while they're competent, they tend to rely on intimidation rather than legal merit when defending technology theft cases. The mention of Harrison, Blake and Associates triggered a memory from my early days at Hartwell Industries. Daniel had frequently bragged about the firm's success in protecting the company from various lawsuits, describing their lawyers as attack dogs who could destroy anyone stupid enough to challenge the Hartwell empire. His confidence in their abilities would likely lead him to underestimate the strength of my position, a mistake that would prove costly. What's our timeline for filing? I asked, understanding that timing would be crucial to maximizing the impact of our legal action. The company's board meeting this afternoon will likely focus on the platform's technical problems. If we can coordinate our filing with their discussions, it could amplify the pressure on their leadership. Rebecca consulted her watch with practiced precision. We can have the initial complaint filed within 2 hours if needed. Federal court requires specific formatting and supporting documentation, but our team is accustomed to expedited filings in high-stakes patent cases. She paused, studying my expression carefully. However, there's another approach we should consider that might prove more effective in the long term. What approach? I asked, intrigued by the strategic possibilities she was contemplating. Rather than filing immediately, we make direct contact with Richard Hartwell personally, she explained, her gray eyes gleaming with tactical calculation. Present him with a comprehensive analysis of his company's liability and offer settlement terms that protect your interests while preserving some possibility of continued collaboration. The shock value of discovering their legal exposure might motivate more reasonable negotiations than protracted litigation. The suggestion had considerable merit from both strategic and practical perspective. Richard Hartwell was fundamentally different from his son, a brilliant engineer who had built his company through innovation rather than inheritance. If presented with irrefutable evidence of his liability and the catastrophic consequences of his son's actions, he might choose pragmatic resolution over expensive legal warfare. That approach also preserves the option of more aggressive action if negotiations fail, James added. Federal courts favor parties who demonstrate good faith efforts to resolve patent disputes through direct communication before resorting to litigation. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her technical analysis with an expression of growing excitement. Sarah, there's another aspect of this situation that we should consider, she said, spreading several patent documents across the table. Your innovations aren't just valuable as standalone technology. They represent foundational principles that could revolutionize multiple industries beyond artificial intelligence. She pointed to specific sections of my quantum probability calculations, highlighting mathematical relationships that I'd discovered during my research. These algorithms could transform financial modeling, climate prediction, medical diagnosis, even space exploration. We're not just discussing patent infringement by one company, but potential licensing opportunities worth tens of billions of dollars across multiple sectors. The broader implications of my work had always fascinated me, but I'd been so focused on developing practical applications for Hartwell Industries that I hadn't fully explored the commercial potential in other fields. The realization that my garage laboratory experiments could reshape entire industries added another dimension to the strategic calculations we were making. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen, this is Richard Hartwell. I've just learned about your situation and would very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. The company jet is being prepared to bring me back from Tokyo immediately. Would you be available for a meeting this evening? The text message was followed immediately by another from his executive assistant, confirming that Mr. Hartwell was cutting short his business trip and would be available for a private meeting at any location I prefer. The urgency of his response suggested that someone had briefed him thoroughly on both my demotion and the platform's subsequent technical collapse. Interesting development, Rebecca observed after I showed her the message. Richard Hartwell rarely involves himself in day-to-day personnel matters unless there are significant strategic implications. His direct outreach suggests he understands the severity of the situation his son has created. It also indicates that he's received technical briefings about the platform's failures. James added, the timing correlation between your demotion and the system collapse would be obvious to anyone with engineering background. I considered the invitation carefully, weighing the potential advantages and risks of direct engagement with Richard Hartwell. On one hand, his personal involvement might lead to faster resolution and better protection for my technology. On the other hand, premature negotiations could limit my leverage if he attempted to minimize the scope of the company's liability. I think we should meet with him, I decided, recognizing the opportunity to control the narrative from the beginning of any settlement discussion, but with clear parameters about what we're willing to discuss and what requires formal legal proceedings. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Agree. We'll prepare a comprehensive brief documenting the patent infringement and potential damages, along with preliminary settlement terms that protect your interests. The meeting serves as our opening move in negotiations, not a commitment to any particular outcome. As the legal team began preparing materials for the evening meeting, my phone erupted with a flurry of messages from colleagues still trapped inside the chaos at Hartwell Industries. The emergency board meeting had apparently devolved into heated arguments between Richard Hartwell and his son, with several directors demanding immediate explanations for the platform's failure and the circumstances of my departure. Daniel's claiming that you sabotaged the systems before leaving, Kevin reported in a detailed text message. Margaret Walsh contradicted him, pointing out that you were escorted out under security supervision with no access to servers or code repository. The technical team is backing Margaret's account. Diana's messages provided additional insights into the corporate drama unfolding in the executive conference room. Richard Hartwell arrived an hour ago looking furious. He's been in private meetings with the engineering directors getting technical briefings. Daniel's been excluded from those discussions. The dynamics were shifting exactly as I'd hoped. Richard Hartwell's engineering background meant he would quickly understand both the technical complexity of my innovations and the impossibility of maintaining the platform without my direct involvement. Daniel's incompetence was being exposed in real time as the systems he claimed to understand collapsed around him. Dr. Chen, Rebecca said, interrupting my review of the incoming messages, we've prepared the documentation for this evening's meeting. The brief includes a comprehensive analysis of your patent portfolio, detailed calculations of Hartwell Industries' liability, and preliminary settlement terms that preserve your ownership rights while potentially allowing continued technology licensing. The settlement terms they'd drafted were more generous than I'd expected, offering Hartwell Industries the possibility of licensing my patents for continued use of the platform while paying substantial royalties and acknowledging my ownership rights. The proposal also included requirements for proper attribution of my innovations and significant governance role in future development decisions. These terms assume that Richard Hartwell will act reasonably once presented with the legal reality, James explained. If he chooses to fight rather than negotiate, we're prepared to pursue full damages and injunctive relief through federal litigation. The afternoon passed quickly as we refined our strategy and prepared for what would likely be the most important business meeting of my career. The irony that I was negotiating for control of technology I'd created while wearing a janitor's uniform wasn't lost on me, but Rebecca assured me that appearances were irrelevant when intellectual property rights were clearly established. Your patents speak louder than any corporate title, she observed while reviewing the final documentation. Daniel Hartwell may have been able to strip you of your office and your position, but he can't strip you of ownership rights to your own innovation. At 5:30, Richard Hartwell's executive assistant called to confirm the meeting location at the neutral conference facilities of Sterling Morrison and Associates. The choice of venue was significant, demonstrating that he understood this was a formal legal proceeding rather than a casual employment discussion. As I prepared for the meeting that would determine the future of both my career and my revolutionary technology, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 24 hours earlier, I'd been a corporate executive focused on advancing artificial intelligence research within the boundaries of traditional employment relationships. Now I was the sole owner of patents worth billions of dollars, facing a confrontation that would reshape the entire landscape of quantum AI development. The woman who entered that conference room would be very different from the one who had meekly accepted a janitor's uniform the previous morning. Daniel Hartwell had inadvertently awakened a force he was completely unprepared to handle, and his father was about to discover exactly what it meant to steal from Dr. Sarah Chen. The meeting would prove to be a revelation for everyone involved, but particularly for the Hartwell family, who were about to learn that underestimating brilliant women was the most expensive mistake they could possibly make. 6:15 arrived with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, and with it came Richard Hartwell. The founder and CEO of Hartwell Industries entered the conference room with the measured stride of someone accustomed to commanding respect through competence rather than inheritance. At 68, he retained the sharp intelligence that had built his company from a small engineering consultancy into a billion-dollar technology empire, though the stress lines around his eyes suggested the weight of recent developments. "Dr. Chen," he said, extending his hand with obvious respect despite my unusual attire, "I owe you a profound apology for the treatment you've received. What my son did was inexcusable from both professional and personal standpoints." His voice carried the authority of someone who rarely needed to raise it to command attention, but also genuine regret that seemed uncharacteristic for a corporate executive. Rebecca Sterling stood to make introductions, her professional demeanor establishing the formal nature of our gathering. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Rebecca Sterling, representing Dr. Chen in matters related to intellectual property rights and potential legal remedies. These are my colleagues, James Morrison and Dr. Amanda Rodriguez." Richard nodded to each team member with appropriate gravity, clearly understanding that this wasn't a simple employment dispute, but a complex legal situation with potentially catastrophic consequences for his company. "I appreciate your willingness to meet with me directly rather than proceeding immediately to litigation," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "though I suspect I may regret that appreciation once I understand the full scope of the situation." "That depends largely on your response to what we're about to discuss," Rebecca replied, activating the digital display that dominated one wall of the conference room. "Dr. Chen's patents represent the foundational technology underlying your quantum intelligence platform. Every significant innovation that generates revenue for your company was created by her, in her personal laboratory, using her own resources." The display showed a comprehensive flowchart mapping each component of the platform to specific patents registered in my name. Richard's expression grew increasingly grave as he studied the technical details, his engineering background allowing him to grasp the implications that had completely escaped his son's understanding. "These filing dates," he said slowly, pointing to several key patents, "they predate Sarah's employment with us, by months in some cases." The realization that his company had been built on technology they didn't actually own was clearly sinking in with devastating clarity. "Precisely," James Morrison replied, advancing to the next section of our presentation. "Dr. Chen has been extraordinarily generous in allowing your company to use her innovations without formal licensing agreement. However, recent events have demonstrated that this informal arrangement is no longer sustainable." Dr. Rodriguez took over the technical explanation, using laser pointer to highlight specific algorithms and computational methods. "Mr. Hartwell, What your son apparently doesn't understand is that this isn't conventional artificial intelligence. Dr. Chen has created something fundamentally new, quantum-enhanced machine learning, that operates on principles no other company has successfully replicated. Richard's face had gone pale as the full magnitude of his company's vulnerability became apparent. The platform collapsed this afternoon, he said quietly. That's related to Sarah's departure. The systems are designed with built-in dependencies that require continuous oversight from their creator, I explained, speaking for the first time since the presentation began. Without proper maintenance protocols that only I fully understand, the quantum matrices become unstable and eventually fail completely. My God, Richard whispered, running his hands through his silver. Daniel said, the technical aspects were fully documented and transferable to other engineers. The fury building in his voice suggested that his son would face significant consequences for his catastrophic mismanagement of the situation. Rebecca advanced to the financial analysis section of our presentation, displaying calculations that made Richard visibly flinch. Mr. Hartwell, the statutory damages for willful patent infringement on this scale could exceed $3 billion. That's before considering lost licensing opportunities and the technology's value in other market sectors. The room fell silent as Richard absorbed the enormity of his company's legal exposure. I watched him carefully, recognizing the sharp intelligence that had built Hartwell Industries, and hoping it would lead him toward reasonable resolution rather than destructive litigation. What are you proposing? He asked finally, his voice steady despite the devastating nature of what he'd learned. I assume you didn't agree to this meeting simply to deliver a declaration of war. We're prepared to offer licensing terms that would allow your company to continue using Chen's technology, Rebecca replied, distributing copies of our preliminary settlement proposal. However, those terms require acknowledgement of her ownership rights, appropriate compensation for past use, and significant changes to your company's management structure. Richard reviewed the documentation with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every detail could have enormous consequences. The settlement terms were comprehensive but not unreasonable, offering his company survival in exchange for honest dealing and appropriate compensation. The governance requirements, he said, studying a particular section of the proposal. Sarah would have veto power over all future development decisions related to quantum AI technology. Chen created this technology and understands its capabilities and limitations better than anyone else in the world, James explained. Protecting the integrity of her innovations requires ensuring they're not misused or degraded through incompetent management. The pointed reference to incompetent management clearly struck home, given Daniel's role in creating the current crisis. Richard's jaw tightened as he continued reading, but his expression suggested growing acceptance of the terms rather than resistance. The financial compensation, he continued, 60% of gross revenues from the platform, retroactive to the beginning of commercial deployment. The numbers were substantial but reflected the reality that my innovations generated virtually all of the platform's value. Your company has profited enormously from Dr. Chen's technology without providing appropriate compensation, Rebecca pointed out. The proposed royalty structure ensures that the actual creator of the technology receives fair compensation for her contribution. Richard closed the settlement document and looked directly at me with an expression of profound regret. Sarah, I need you to understand that I had no knowledge of how Daniel treated you, or of the intellectual property issues underlying our platform. If I had known, none of this would have happened. His sincerity was apparent, but the damage had already been done. Mr. Hartwell, your ignorance of the situation doesn't change the legal reality, I replied carefully. Your company has been using my technology without authorization for over 2 years. The fact that you delegated oversight to someone incompetent doesn't absolve you of responsibility. You're absolutely right, he acknowledged, his executive authority unable to protect him from the consequences of his son's action. Daniel will be removed from all technology oversight immediately, and his authority over personnel decisions will be revoked pending a complete review of his fitness for any leadership role. The promise of consequences for Daniel was satisfying from a personal standpoint, but my primary concern remained protecting my technology and ensuring it was developed responsibly. Ms. Hartwell,
The most important issue isn't punishing your son, but establishing proper governance for quantum AI development. This technology has implications far beyond commercial applications. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, approving. Sarah's innovations could revolutionize fields ranging from climate modeling to medical research. Ensuring responsible development requires expertise that your current management structure clearly lacks. Richard spent several minutes reviewing the settlement terms again, occasionally asking clarifying questions about technical specifications or legal requirements. His engineering background allowed him to understand both the revolutionary nature of my work and the impossibility of continuing platform operations without my cooperation. The transition timeline, he said finally. You're proposing a 6-month period for implementing the new governance structure and compensation arrangements. That allows time for proper documentation transfer and staff training, James explained. Chen would return to a senior technical role with authority commensurate with her contributions, while your company adapts to the new operational structure.
The prospect of returning to Hartwell Industries in a position of actual authority was appealing, but I remained cautious about committing to any arrangement until the legal framework was firmly established. Ms. Hartwell, my willingness to consider continued collaboration depends entirely on your company's willingness to acknowledge my rights and implement genuine reforms. I understand completely, he replied, his tone suggesting both acceptance of my conditions and relief that resolution remained possible. Sarah, I built this company on the principle that innovation should be properly rewarded and protected. What happened to you violates everything I believe about how technology companies should operate. Rebecca and James exchanged glances that suggested cautious optimism about the direction of our negotiations. Richard's willingness to acknowledge the severity of the situation and consider substantial reforms indicated that settlement may be achievable without protracted litigation. Mr. Hartwell, Rebecca said, will need these terms formalized through binding legal agreements before Dr. Chen considers any return to active collaboration. The intellectual property assignments, compensation structures, and governance changes must be legally enforceable to prevent future disputes. Of course, Richard agreed, understanding that trust would need to be rebuilt through legal certainty rather than personal promises. I'll have our legal team begin drafting the necessary agreements immediately, though I suspect they'll require significant consultation with your firm to ensure proper protection of Sarah's interests. The meeting continued for another hour as we refined the specific terms and timelines for implementing the proposed settlement. Richard's cooperation was encouraging, but I remained aware that his son and other company executives might resist changes that reduced their authority and acknowledged my ownership rights. As the formal session concluded, Richard approached me with an expression of personal remorse that seemed to transcend the business implications of our discussion. Sarah, I want you to know that my son's behavior reflects his character, not the values this company was built on. You deserved far better treatment, and I intend to ensure that you receive it going forward. His apology was genuine, but the damage to my trust in corporate leadership would require more than words to repair. Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the situation. Whether we can build a productive working relationship depends on your company's actions over the coming weeks. As Richard departed to begin implementing the reforms we'd discussed, I remained in the conference room with my legal team to debrief the meeting and plan our next step. The settlement offer provided a pathway toward protecting my interests while continuing development of the quantum AI technology, but success would depend on Hartwell Industries' willingness to honor their commitment. He seemed genuine in his desire to resolve this situation, Rebecca observed as we reviewed the meeting notes. However, we should prepare for resistance from other company executives who benefit from the current power structure. Daniel Hartwell in particular is unlikely to accept his demotion gracefully, James added. He's spent years building his authority within the company, and these changes threaten his eventual succession to leadership. The prospect of ongoing conflict with Daniel was concerning but not surprising. His sense of entitlement and his demonstrated willingness to abuse power suggested that he would fight any arrangement that acknowledged my superior contributions to the company's success. We'll monitor the situation closely and be prepared to pursue litigation if the settlement terms aren't implemented properly, Rebecca assured me. Your legal position is extremely strong, and any attempt to undermine the agreement would only strengthen our case for maximum damage. As I finally changed out of the janitor's uniform that had defined my day, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred over the past 24 hours. The woman who had meekly accepted humiliation and demotion had been replaced by someone who owned patents worth billions of dollars and possessed the power to reshape an entire industry. Daniel Hartwell had intended to destroy my career and crush my spirit, but his actions had instead awakened a force that would ultimately destroy his own position and transform his family's company. The battle was far from over, but the first major engagement had been decisively won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Hartwell Industries attempted to implement the reforms necessary to continue using my technology, but tonight belonged to the satisfaction of knowing that justice was finally within reach. The woman who had been dismissed as a disruptive personality was about to become the most powerful person in quantum artificial intelligence, and Daniel Hartwell was about to learn exactly what disruption really meant. The emergency board meeting at Hartwell Industries erupted into chaos the moment Richard Hartwell announced that his son would be stepping down from all operational responsibilities effective immediately. Daniel's face flushed crimson as he processed the devastating news, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time before the assembled directors and senior executives. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Daniel shouted, his composure finally shattering after days of mounting pressure. "I've dedicated my entire career to this company, and you're going to destroy my reputation based on the lies of a disgruntled employee who sabotaged our systems out of spite." His voice echoed off the mahogany walls of the boardroom, drawing uncomfortable glances from directors who had witnessed similar outbursts throughout his tenure. Richard's expression remained granite hard as he faced his son across the polished conference table. "Daniel, Chen owns the patents to every technology that generates revenue for this company. Your treatment of her constitutes theft on a scale that could bankrupt us entirely." The words carried the weight of absolute certainty, backed by the legal documentation Rebecca Sterling had provided during their evening meeting. Board member Patricia Valdez, a veteran technology executive who had questioned Daniel's qualifications for years, leaned forward with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Hartwell, are you saying that the quantum intelligence platform belongs to Dr. Chen personally, not to the company?" Her question cut straight to the heart of the crisis that had been developing throughout the week. "Every significant innovation in our AI systems was created by Dr. Chen using her personal resources and filed under her name alone," Richard confirmed, his voice heavy with the implication. "We've been using her technology without proper licensing agreements for over 2 years. The potential damages exceed our total corporate assets." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room as directors grappled with the magnitude of the company's legal exposure. Several board members immediately began calculating the financial implications, while others questioned how such a fundamental oversight could have occurred without executive awareness. Daniel's anger transformed into desperate calculation as he recognized the existential threat to his position and inheritance. "There has to be some mistake," he insisted, his voice taking on a pleading quality that undermined his authority even further. "The employment agreements include intellectual property clauses that protect company interests. Our legal team assured me that all innovations belong to Hartwell Industries." "The legal team you're referring to apparently never bothered to research the actual patent filings," responded Margaret Walsh, the HR director who had been forced to participate in my humiliating demotion. "Dr. Chen's innovations were developed outside of company time using personal equipment. The intellectual property clauses don't apply to work conducted independently." The systematic dismantling of Daniel's position continued as Richard outlined the settlement terms I had proposed through my legal team. The board members listened with growing alarm as they learned about the governance changes, compensation requirements, and acknowledgement of my ownership rights that would be necessary to continue platform operation. 60% of platform revenues, repeated board member Thomas Crawford, a conservative investor who had always favored traditional business models over technological innovation. "Chen created the entire foundation of our artificial intelligence business." His tone suggested profound disappointment in the leadership failures that had created such vulnerability. "Because she did create the entire foundation," Richard replied bluntly. "Sarah's quantum-enhanced algorithms represent breakthrough innovations that no other company has successfully replicated." Without her continued involvement, the platform will become completely inoperable within weeks. The technical reality of the situation was becoming increasingly apparent as Kevin Martinez provided updates on the ongoing system failure. The quantum intelligence platform had lost another major client that morning after producing prediction accuracies below conventional AI standards, and several other contracts were under review pending resolution of the technical problem. The cascade failures are accelerating, Kevin reported during his emergency briefing to the board. Without Dr. Chen's oversight and calibration protocols, the quantum matrices are destabilizing faster than we can compensate. We're looking at complete platform shutdown within 72 hours unless the underlying issues are resolved. Daniel's face had gone pale as the full scope of his miscalculation became undeniable. The woman he had dismissed as a disruptive personality controlled technology worth billions of dollars, and his petty power games had triggered a corporate crisis that threatened everything his family had built over decades. There has to be another solution, Daniel said desperately, his voice cracking under the strain of watching his inheritance evaporate. We can hire quantum computing specialists from other companies, or license similar technology from competitors. Dr. Chen can't be the only person capable of maintaining artificial intelligence systems. Dr. Rodriguez, who had joined the meeting as a technical consultant, shook her head with obvious exasperation at Daniel's continued ignorance. Mr. Hartwell, what Dr. Chen created doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. The quantum probability calculations and adaptive learning protocols represent entirely new approaches to machine intelligence. Replacing her innovations would require rebuilding the entire platform from scratch, assuming anyone else could replicate her theoretical breakthrough. The reality that no alternatives existed sent another wave of panic through the boardroom as directors contemplated the collapse of their primary revenue stream. The quantum intelligence platform generated over 60% of company profits, and losing access to that technology would require massive restructuring that might not preserve the company's viability. Richard had heard enough of his son's desperate attempts to avoid responsibility for the crisis he had created. Daniel, your authority over technology decisions is terminated immediately, he announced with finality that brooked no argument. Chen will be returning to the company with full control over quantum AI development and appropriate compensation for her contributions. You can't do this to me, Daniel protested, his voice rising to a near shriek that echoed embarrassingly through the executive conference room. I'm your son, your heir, your chosen successor. You're going to destroy our family legacy because of one woman's vindictive manipulation of patent law. The accusation that I was manipulating patent law rather than protecting my legitimate intellectual property demonstrated how completely Daniel failed to understand the legal and ethical dimensions of the situation. His sense of entitlement had blinded him to the reality that ownership rights existed, independent of his personal desires or family connections. Our family legacy will be destroyed if we continue down the path you've chosen, Richard replied coldly. Chen created revolutionary technology and deserves recognition and compensation for her innovations. Your treatment of her was not only morally wrong but legally catastrophic for this company. Board member Susan Martinez, who had built her career in technology licensing and understood the implications better than most, posed the question that everyone was contemplating. Mr. Hartwell, what assurance do we have that Dr. Chen will agree to the settlement terms you've outlined? Given the treatment she received, she might prefer to pursue maximum damages through litigation rather than continued collaboration. The question highlighted the precarious nature of the company's position as they waited for my response to the preliminary settlement offer. Richard's meeting with my legal team had established a framework for potential resolution, but formal agreements still needed to be negotiated and signed before any protection existed. Chen has demonstrated remarkable professionalism throughout this situation, Richard replied, though his expression suggested concern about my ultimate decision. However, we must acknowledge that she holds all the leverage in these negotiations. Our survival depends entirely on her willingness to work with us rather than against us. The admission that a former employee now controlled the company's fate sent ripples of anxiety through the room as directors contemplated scenarios where I might choose litigation over settlement. The potential damages from willful patent infringement could exceed the company's ability to pay, forcing bankruptcy and liquidation of assets. Daniel's final desperate gambit involved threatening to contest my patent rights through administrative challenges and prior art research. Patent applications can be challenged, he announced with renewed defiance. We'll prove that Dr. Chen's innovations were derived from existing company research and collaborative efforts with our engineering team. The suggestion that my breakthrough work was derived from existing research prompted Dr. Rodriguez to display technical specifications that highlighted the revolutionary nature of my innovations. Mr. Hartwell, these quantum probability matrices represent entirely new mathematical approaches to machine learning. No prior art exists, because no one else has developed anything remotely similar. Kevin Martinez, who had worked closely with me throughout the platform's development, provided the final blow to Daniel's credibility. Every major breakthrough came from Dr. Chen's personal research conducted outside company facilities. He testified to the assembled board. Our team provided implementation support, but the core innovations were entirely her creation. The systematic destruction of Daniel's position was complete as board members absorbed the reality that their technology leadership had been based on stolen intellectual property and their heir apparent was incompetent to manage the crisis he had created. The silence that followed Kevin's testimony was broken only by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Richard finally stood to address the board with the gravity the situation demanded. Ladies and gentlemen, we face a choice between accepting responsibility for our failures and attempting to fight a battle we cannot win. Dr. Chen's legal position is unassailable, and her technical expertise is irreplaceable. We will implement the settlement terms she has proposed, and hope that our cooperation earns her continued collaboration. The vote to accept my settlement offer passed unanimously, with Daniel abstaining in furious silence as his authority evaporated around him. Board member after board member acknowledged that no alternative existed to accepting my terms, and hoping that generous compensation would motivate my return to active involvement with the company. As the meeting concluded and directors filed out in subdued conversation, Daniel remained seated at the conference table staring at the ruins of his inheritance with obvious shock. The man who had wielded power so carelessly over employees he considered beneath him, now faced the consequences of underestimating someone whose intellect and legal position far exceeded his own. Son, Richard said quietly as the room emptied, you have 48 hours to clean out your office and surrender all company devices and access credentials. Security will escort you from the building, and any attempt to contact Chen or interfere with settlement negotiations will result in criminal charges for harassment and corporate sabotage. The finality of his father's words seemed to penetrate Daniel's shock as he realized that his actions had cost him not just his position, but his relationship with his family. Years of entitlement and arrogance had culminated in a catastrophic miscalculation that would define the rest of his life. 3 days later, I returned to Hartwell Industries as Chief Innovation Officer with equity participation, patent royalties, and complete authority over quantum AI development. The corner office that Daniel had briefly occupied was now mine by right rather than corporate politics, equipped with direct access to the quantum computing arrays that powered my revolutionary technology. The settlement agreement had been executed with remarkable efficiency, once Richard Hartwell committed to accepting my terms without further negotiation. The financial compensation exceeded my initial expectations, but more importantly, the governance structure ensured that my innovations would be developed responsibly under my direct supervision. Daniel's departure from the company had been swift and ignominious, his security escort through the lobby witnessed by employees who understood exactly why their former technology leader was being removed. The man who had once commanded deference through inherited authority, now faced a future defined by the consequences of his own choices. Kevin Martinez approached my desk during my first morning back with an expression of profound relief and anticipation. Chen, the quantum matrices have been offline for 72 hours awaiting your return. The entire platform is essentially dormant until you can restore the calibration protocol. The technical challenge of rebuilding the system's stability was significant, but manageable given my comprehensive understanding of the underlying algorithm. Within hours of beginning the restoration process, the the quantum intelligence platform was producing results that exceeded its previous performance levels, generating client confidence and renewed investor interest. The improvement metrics are remarkable, Diana Foster reported during our first team meeting since my return. Prediction accuracy has increased by 12% over previous baselines, and processing speed has improved dramatically. Whatever changes you've made are having extraordinary impact. The enhancements weren't accidental but reflected months of theoretical work I had conducted during evenings and weekends, while serving in my previous subordinate role. My enforced absence had provided time to develop optimizations that were now being implemented with proper resources and authority. Richard Hartwell visited my office personally to express his gratitude for my willingness to continue working with the company despite the treatment I had received from his son. Sarah, I want you to know that this company will be run very differently going forward. Your experience has taught us valuable lessons about respecting talent and protecting innovation. His commitment to cultural change was encouraging, but the true test would come as we expanded the quantum AI technology into new applications and markets. The licensing opportunities Dr. Rodriguez had identified represented billions of dollars in potential revenue, but realizing that potential required careful development and strategic partnerships. The broader implications of my victory extended far beyond personal vindication or financial compensation. The precedent established by my successful assertion of patent rights would influence how technology companies approached intellectual property and employee relations throughout Silicon Valley and beyond. The tech industry has been watching this situation very closely, Rebecca Sterling informed me during our final legal consultation. Your case demonstrates that innovation can be protected even when corporate power tries to suppress individual inventors. Expect other companies to revise their employment agreements and patent policies to avoid similar exposure. The transformation of Hartwell Industries into a company that properly valued and protected innovation attracted attention from top engineering talent who had previously avoided organizations known for political rather than merit-based advancement. Within months, our quantum AI team had grown to include some of the most brilliant researchers in the field. The technology itself continued evolving under my leadership, with applications expanding into climate modeling, medical diagnosis, and financial prediction systems that generated unprecedented accuracy in complex forecasting scenarios. Each new application created additional licensing opportunities while establishing Hartwell Industries as the undisputed leader in quantum-enhanced artificial intelligence. Daniel's attempts to rebuild his career at competing technology companies were unsuccessful as word of his role in nearly destroying Hartwell Industries spread throughout the industry. The man who had once commanded respect through family connections now found himself unemployable in Silicon Valley, his reputation permanently damaged by his catastrophic mismanagement of both personnel and technology. The annual company meeting, 18 months after my return, featured presentations highlighting record revenues, breakthrough innovations, and industry recognition that positioned Hartwell Industries among the most successful technology companies in the world. Richard Hartwell acknowledged my contributions publicly, crediting my leadership with transforming the company's culture and establishing its technological supremacy. Dr. Sarah Chen represents everything this company stands for, Richard announced to the assembled employees and investors. Her innovations drive our success, her leadership inspires our teams, and her commitment to excellence defines our standards. Hartwell Industries exists today because of her brilliance and her willingness to work with us, despite the failures of our past. The standing ovation that followed his remarks reflected genuine appreciation from colleagues who understood that my victory had protected not just my own interests, but the technological foundation that supported all their careers. The culture change Richard had promised was evident in how innovation was discussed, developed, and rewarded throughout the organization. My personal office displayed the patents that had saved my career and transformed my life, each one representing months of research conducted in my garage laboratory while corporate executives dismissed my potential. The woman who had once cleaned these floors now controlled technology worth billions of dollars and shaped the future of artificial intelligence development. The final vindication came when Daniel attempted to challenge the settlement agreement through frivolous litigation,
claiming that he had been denied due process in his removal from the company. His legal action was dismissed within weeks, with the judge noting that corporate boards possessed clear authority to remove executives who created legal liability through incompetent leadership. Hartwell's claims lack any basis in law or fact, the federal judge observed during the dismissal hearing. His removal was the natural consequence of actions that threatened his company's survival through willful disregard of intellectual property rights. The ruling effectively ended Daniel's hopes of regaining his position or challenging the new corporate structure that acknowledged my rightful role as the creator and owner of quantum AI technology. His sense of entitlement had been decisively rejected by both corporate governance and federal law. As I stood in my office, overlooking the San Francisco skyline, I reflected on the remarkable journey from janitor's uniform to technology leadership that had defined the past 2 years. The woman who had been dismissed as a disruptive personality had indeed proven disruptive, but to corruption and incompetence rather than innovation and progress. The quantum intelligence platform continued generating revolutionary results that changed how industries approached complex prediction problems, while the licensing agreements I had negotiated ensured that other companies could benefit from my innovations, while providing appropriate compensation for their use. Daniel Hartwell had intended to destroy my career and demonstrate his power over subordinates who challenged his authority. Instead, his actions had awakened a force that transformed an entire industry while establishing new standards for protecting intellectual property and respecting innovation. The arrogant young man who had handed me a janitor's uniform while sitting in my chair had learned the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. Underestimating Dr. Sarah Chen had cost him his inheritance, his career and his future, while elevating me to heights he had never dreamed possible. The technology I created in my garage laboratory now powered systems that influenced millions of decisions daily, from medical diagnoses that saved lives to financial predictions that guided global markets. The woman who had been forced to mop floors was now shaping the future of human civilization through artificial intelligence that exceeded every previous threshold of capability. Justice had been served not through revenge but through recognition, not through destruction but through protection of innovation and intellectual honesty. The quantum revolution I had launched would continue long after Daniel Hartwell was forgotten, a lasting testament to the power of brilliance over entitlement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.